Before leaving, she asked Francis if he would be her spiritual director. That is, if he would help her develop a closer relationship with the Lord. Francis was inclined immediately to do so, but he thought he should pray about it more and see what God's will would be for him. Francis went back to his diocese after successfully completing the Lenten sermons and an understanding with the Archbishop, who renounced all his claims to the territory of Gex. He would wait until August of that year to make his final decision about Jane. He wrote her on April 26th, however, saying, "I think God gave me to you. Every hour makes me more sure of it." From August 24th to the 28th, Francis' mother, Madame de Boisy, would make a pilgrimage to the shrine of Saint Claude in the Jura Mountains, northwest of Savoy. Francis and his little sister, Jean, would accompany her. It has long been an area frequented by travelers, especially those en route to the shrine of Saint Claude. The city of Saint Claude and its cathedral, dedicated to St. Peter, is still a popular pilgrimage spot. It had been the abbey church of the monastery there. In Francis' time, as today, the wood-carved choir stalls, completed by Jean de Vitry in 1465, attracted visitors, such as this carving of St. Peter, or this carving at the far end of the stalls, possibly of Saint Claude himself, or of this petit jouet, or little figure, carved into the rail of the stall. Jane de Chantal and two of her friends would meet Francis and his group at Saint Claude. The shrine was almost halfway between Annecy and Montalon. Previously, on April 26, 1604, he had written to Jane, "I think that God gave me to you. Every hour makes me more sure of it." Now at Saint Claude, he handed her this note, signed by himself. "I accept, in the name of God, the responsibility for your spiritual guidance, and will do everything possible with all care and fidelity, and as much as my episcopacy and my previous duties will permit me." Chapter 8, The Bishop among the People of God. Upon his return to Savoy, Francis began to visit his widespread diocese in the foothills of the Alps. Often the villages would be high in the mountains, such as this little church in Ubin. It is still used today. In 1605, while preaching during Lent at La Roche, Francis had made the acquaintance of a simple village woman named Pernette Boutet, who lived in Amnesty, a small market town near La Roche. After her death, Francis wrote Jane. She was one of my great friends and had often recommended me to God. The village still exists and contains an important chateau that existed even before the time of St. Francis de Sales. Pernette managed a dry goods store and drapery store. She attended Mass daily, even though the church was very distant. She visited the sick, taught catechism, and even found time for meditation. Even before writing the Introduction to the Devout Life, Francis was working on a book that would eventually become the treatise on the love of God. Francis wrote Jane, "Whenever I happen to have a quarter of an hour free, I spend it writing an admirable life of a saint about whom you have not heard me speak. You will see a good portion of it when you come to Annecy. I shall be able to interpolate in some corner of it the story of our humble village woman." He was speaking of Pernette Boutet from Amnesty. The present owners of the chateau in Annecy have restored it. They wanted to show us what it had looked like in the days of Francis. In Annecy, Francis would set up the Florimondin Academy with his friend Antoine Favre in the Rue Sainte-Claire. This is a view of the courtyard of the building where the academy would meet. It was a society devoted to the study of the humanities, science, and art. The members would come together for discussions and would communicate their findings to others. This very Christian, humanistic endeavor showed the continuing influence of the Renaissance, embracing all of the progress made by human beings since classical times and expanding on it through the newly found scientific and artistic achievements. It showed the influence of the Counter-Reformation, or Catholic Reformation, and bringing all of this to God, the source of the genius in human beings and their world, for further insight and power to use all God had provided for the good of all peoples. It showed the influence of the movements in France toward deeper personal piety and sincere love of one's neighbor, as preached and exemplified by Francis de Sales himself. Francis de Sales is depicted with his three close friends in a window from the chapel of the Petit Frère of Nazareth in Belley. Standing in front of him is President Antoine Favre. At his side, the Archbishop of Bourges, Jane's brother, and behind him, Bishop Camus of Belley, who wrote The Spirit of St. Francis de Sales, containing many stories about Francis as he had known him. The Académie Florimondin existed before the French Academy. It was Favre's son, the grammarian Vaugelas, who participated in these meetings, who was instrumental in founding the French Academy that exists today as a custodian of the French language. The original Florimondin Academy only lasted a few years. Antoine Favre was made president of the Senate in Chambéry, and Francis' obligations grew. It was revived much later and still exists today. For a while it was located down the street from the cathedral in Annecy, on the far left of this photo, in the same building as the former chancery and the present police station. The secretary of the Academy is Monsieur Pierre Soudan, here shown in the Academy's library. In 1606, Francis was called upon by the Pope to intervene in a theological dispute between the Dominicans and the Jesuits over what is more important in our lives, God's grace or our free will. The Dominicans stressed the value of God's assistance, the Jesuits the importance of our free will. The partisans of the Jesuit Molina and the Dominican Banez had disputed this over 20 years. Francis told them either position, taken to the extreme, could lead to heresy, and suggested there were more important issues to be dealt with by the Church. The Pope agreed. Francis had agreed to become Jane's director. They exchanged many letters and met from time to time. Their families became close. In 1607, while returning from Annecy, Jane brought Francis' sister, Jeanne de Sales, to her home to be raised with her daughters. Francis' mother agreed reluctantly so that her daughter would be educated and make progress in the spiritual life. They no sooner arrived when Jeanne de Sales died suddenly. Jane was again overcome with grief. We are told she even made a vow to give one of her own daughters to the House of Sales, which actually did take place later. Her daughter and Francis' brother would marry.